Scott just made the point.
Jefferson, you'll read to be a lot more secure, not just.
Well, another week, another Muslim terror attack, this time in Brussels. Now, of course, when we say another Muslim terror attack, we mean another Muslim terror attack big enough to make the front page, because there's hardly a day that goes by without some new Islamic mass murder that kills, I don't know, 6 or 20 or 40 in Africa or Iraq or Southeast Asia or wherever Islam is at war with the rest of the world, which is to say, everywhere. Now, one of these additional little attacks, you know, murders of 1 or 2 or a dozen people or so, was particularly heartbreaking. Asad Shah, a small businessman in Glasgow, Scotland, personified the type of moderate Muslim that we hear so much about when asking questions about certain members of the religion of pieces. He had the temerity to wish a happy Easter to his Christian neighbors, and he tweeted, "Good Friday and very happy Easter, especially to my beloved Christian nation. Let's follow the real footsteps of beloved holy Jesus Christ and get the real success in both worlds." And reports are that upon seeing this, a Muslim man traveled some 200 miles and then stabbed him to death outside of his small store. People in the neighborhood said that he was a very nice man, and I'm sure he was. So let's bring in Steve Green and Scott Ott to help us make sense of our 3-part trifecta that I'm calling the ethics of Islamic immigration. Now, here in part 1, we're going to take a look at the situation in Europe as it exists today. In part 2, we'll try to get a handle on things here in America. And in our members-only part 3, we'll see if we can look into the future and try to find some way out of this conundrum. Because, gentlemen, it's a conundrum. Because Islamic immigrants were all like Asad Shah. If they were all lovely, friendly people like that, we wouldn't have any problems at all. And if they were all mass murderers, we'd have a bigger problem, but we'd still have a problem we can handle. Here in America, and especially Europe, though, we're crippled by the fact that both Asad Shah and his murderer were immigrants living among Westerners in Britain and Belgium and France, Germany, and all the rest. So, Scotty, how do we track down and kill people like the animals that committed acts like this, and Brussels, and Paris, and San Bernardino, and New York, etc., without expelling people like Asad Shah and his family who are fearing for their lives, not from evil, racist white Scots, but rather from their own Muslim community?
You know, there was a TV show back in the 1960s called Dragnet, and I think that's the idea that a lot of people have when we approach something like this, that we can cast a wide net and sort of strain them all out and work through and figure, you know, pull the good fish out and put them in one bucket and pull the bad fish out and put them in another bucket. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way because law enforcement has only so many hours in the day and so many people on staff to be able to sort through this. So you have to have a rifle approach rather than a shotgun approach. And the challenge is that the vast, overwhelming majority of Muslim immigrants in Britain or here or anywhere in Europe are peaceable people who will never do anything horrible. They'll never break any laws and stuff like that. So you have to use some other indicator other than professed faith. Now, of course, if somebody coming in is a terrorist, they're going to lie to you. So, like, how are you going to screen them out, you know? And you can't just say, well, we'll never let another Muslim person into our country. That wouldn't make any sense at all. You know, I wish that, you know, I'm a Christian. I wish that they would all come to faith in Jesus Christ, but that hasn't happened yet. And we can't have an immigration system that basically says, well, we've got a percentage of people here who are bloodthirsty killers, and so we have to weed them all out. Because what we do then is we condemn the innocent possibly to death in their own countries at the hands of these maniacs. So I want to say that there's no easy answer to this. And anybody who gives you some sort of facile solution and say, oh, yeah, we'll just build a wall or we'll just stop everybody or we'll just... There is no just. There is no one little thing that you can do and take care of the problem. I mean, one of the nicest people I ever met while running for office back in Pennsylvania was a Muslim guy who came over with his family and they started a little business and it was thriving. And I met him at a Christian prayer breakfast. That was where I encountered him. Why was he at the Christian prayer breakfast? Was he interested in converting to Christ? No, he was interested in selling stuff from his business to the other business people who were in the room. He was one of the nicest guys I ever met, invited me to go to his mosque, had a lovely time there, had a nice dinner, and everybody was very peaceful and kind and loving. So how do we figure out if there's one guy in that mosque who's not like my friend? I don't think there's an easy answer to that other than the normal tools of law enforcement, of following leads, of finding out about suspects, of tracking where the money goes, and trying to get confessions from people who were involved. It's law enforcement.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Steve, the attack in Brussels and the one in Paris and all the rest of them are going to grow more numerous over time. They're not going to grow less frequent. And if the few Muslims willing to show that they've assimilated are killed on their doorsteps in front of their families for wishing their neighbors a happy Easter, then what hope is there for Europe and, by extension, some years down the road, for America?
Yeah, I hate to say this, but it's probably too late for Europe. There is a couple of great pieces I read earlier this week, one by our own Richard Fernandez, who I always say is the smartest man in the world, and number two, ain't even close. And the other was from former NSA guy and Naval War College guy, John Schindler. And they both argued, coincidentally on the same day, that it's no longer terrorism in Europe. It's intifada, it's guerrilla war, it's small scale right now.
Yep.
But Belgian intelligence had a line on these guys before they attacked in Brussels, and the police were looking for them. And what they received going into these Islamic neighborhoods in Brussels, which is about 25% Muslim now, they got no help. In other words, these terrorists had a safe haven right in their own communities. And when you have that, when the locals are no longer willing to work with the police, the opportunity for murder, for destruction, for mayhem, for all the rest just grows incalculably. And there was another report that I read on Tuesday, and this one was by Frederick Kagan, and I can't remember the other gentleman's name. It was in AEI, I believe. And they told the story that based on Iran's own casualty reports coming out of Syria, it's a high percentage of officers and NCOs and virtually no privates, so virtually no foot soldiers. So what they believe Iran has done in Syria is sent over cadres of officers and NCOs from the Revolutionary Guard to work with the Syrian militias, and this program apparently has been so effective that Syria was able to take Palmyra back in very short order from ISIS. So now you have Iran's Revolutionary Guard with this new ability to send small cadres of officers and NCOs virtually anywhere to take very different groups, train them, lead them, and have them fight successfully. Can you imagine what 50 or 100 of these officers and NCOs could do spread out to, say, Brussels, Belgium, Paris, London? It may be too late.
Can you imagine what the world would look like if in 2009 Barack Obama had defended the Iranian people who were in the streets fighting for their freedom to overthrow this murderous regime? Yeah. And instead of helping them get their freedom, of course, he overturns the government of Egypt and the government of Libya and the government of Syria. It's enough to make a grown man cry. Folks, I keep coming back to history because history is the only laboratory we have. When Adolf Hitler took the Rhine and then Austria and then the Sudetenland and then Czechoslovakia and finally Poland, Winston Churchill continued to face people who said that to stand up to the power of Hitler was to provoke him and just make things worse. That's what terror does to people. It terrifies them. Churchill said he could not understand the idea that decent people had to be struck dead before they could hit back. Before they could be morally right, they just had to be dead. But apparently that's exactly what needs to happen, at least as far as these elitist governments all around the world are concerned. We have these terror attacks and government officials hold vigils and there's lots of tears and there were flowers and all the rest. And then once the murderers of both Westerners and their own people just get back up and march down the streets of Belgium and France and Britain. They're calling for the destruction of the West and the establishment of Sharia and the Caliphate, while civic leaders talk about things like the dangers of backlash and preached against the evils of secularism as if this was a two-way street. It's not a two-way street. There's one religion at war with all the others, and that has been its MO since it first appeared on the scene. We'll talk more about that in part 2, where we'll see if we can come to grips with this phenomenon in America before it's too late. For PJTV, I'm Bill Whittle.